Hi there, I'm Karen McWhorter. I'm the Collier Reed Director of Curatorial Education and Museum Services here at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to, or hopefully reacquaint you with, the Center of the West. We are an absolute treasure trove located in Northwest Wyoming, very near to the Montana border and just on the east gate of Yellowstone National Park. Here in this first slide, you see our exterior facade as you would enter it from the front doors. You'll notice that we have 5 graphic images across the windows there, and those represent the 5 museum collections contained within the Center of the West. On the right of the doors, you'll see our proud affiliation with the Smithsonian Institute. We are what's known as a Smithsonian affiliate, endorsed by that body. You may be familiar with the Buffalo Bill as the historical center in years past, and it really has gone through many iterations, this institution. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the early history of the institution and about what you can enjoy on your upcoming visit today and in the near future. So again, you can see from this image that we have a lot to offer. And as well, you get the beginning of an inkling of what the campus looks like. It is covered in garden spaces. There are also some wild spaces, plenty of outdoor sculpture to enjoy, but there is much to be seen on the interior. Here is a bird's eye view of our campus. And I want to point you first to this circus, this circular park on the north side of our campus. In the middle of this stands Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's sculpture, The Scout, which was the first monumental bronze dedicated to Buffalo Bill Cody. And we'll talk a bit about how that sculpture predates this large campus that you see and also has everything to do with the earliest chapters of our institutional history. But from this overview, you get the sense of how large of a space we have. It is 7 interior acres. This is why admission gives you 2 days for the price of 1 ticket, because it takes at least that long to even begin to have a sense of the tip of the iceberg of what this museum contains. We're located on the west side of town, really what used to be the edge of town, at the western end of Sheridan Avenue in Cody, Wyoming. The campus, again, is quite large. It contains 5 museums. We'll go through each of these in turn today. Contains a research library that's renowned. And in fact, before my tenure at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, I worked at the Denver Art Museum in Colorado. And while working on my master's degree and concurrently working at the dam, and working on exhibition research, I looked to the McCracken up in Cody as the repository for the resources that I needed. So actually, before I came up to Cody to work, I was working with the staff here on Western American research. There are 2 temporary exhibition galleries in our campus, and we will look at the shows that are on now in those spaces and what is yet to come. One of these spaces is dedicated to photography as a medium, and the other, a much larger space, which resides under the Buffalo Bill Museum here, can be any number of types of exhibitions. It could be curated externally or internally or through a partnership. Most often, they are large-scale art exhibitions in that space. We have education classrooms as well, and an incredibly robust education program. One of the calling cards of this program are our virtual field trips. We conduct these for students across the globe. We have staff that comes in early in the morning, late at night, to share stories of the American West with students in Asia, in Australia, and everywhere in between. We'll talk a little bit more about our education programs in a bit. From this angle, you can also get a sense of the outdoor spaces, which are expansive on our campus. We have gardens filled with sculpture of varying scale. There's interpretation to find along sculpture walks. There is a raptor muse, and by that I mean a home for birds. We have rehabilitated birds of prey, and we'll touch on that program in a bit. That program is associated with the Draper Natural History Museum. We also have two historical buildings on our campus. One you'll see here is Buffalo Bill's boyhood home. The other is here, kind of hidden in this pocket garden, and that is Joseph Henry Sharp's Absaroki hut, his studio cabin, which was once installed on Crow Agency in Montana. Sharp was an artist who worked between Montana and New Mexico, and we have reassembled and recreated his studio cabin so you can get a sense of his working style when he was in the mountains and plains of Montana. We also have powwow grounds, which are located off screen and just to the south of this image, and then nature trails, many of which are north and off screen of this image. These are right alongside the Shoshone River. So when you enter the Buffalo Bill Center of the West today, this is what you'll see: a bustling center, a hub of activity. You will walk through and be greeted by the admissions staff. And then heading on in, you enter what we call the Collier Rendezvous Hall, or affectionately the hub. This is really kind of the center of a wagon wheel whose spokes represent the various museums, 5 spreading out. The Firearms Museum is furthest to our right, then the Whitney Western Art Museum, the Plains Indian Museum, the Buffalo Bill Museum, and the Draper Natural History Museum. You can see that art is on view really everywhere, and it truly is in every museum space, most likely in the Firearms Museum, but truly everywhere else. And if we followed the stairs down here, south of the hub, we would enter into the temporary exhibition space. So here are a couple images, one historic, one contemporary, of the Scout, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's The Scout. And in fact, there she is, the sculptress, standing proudly next to her work. You might know the name Whitney from the Whitney Museum in New York. And in fact, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney was the founder of the Whitney Museum of American Art, which in its early days was meant to patronize living, working artists. And one of those artists was the founder herself, Whitney. She was a fabulous philanthropist. You can imagine she was quite able to support the arts and other causes near and dear to her heart. And she was also a sculptress in her own right. And it was very prescient that after Buffalo Bill's passing in 1917, the Buffalo Bill Memorial Association sought out a commission from Whitney to create the world's first monument, sculptural monument to Buffalo Bill Cody. And here is the finished product. It was actually put in place well before the contemporary campus was built. So Buffalo Bill passes in 1917, and the sculpture commission is begun in the 1920s and consummated by the end of the decade. Whitney actually donated her time, the cost of materials, really all associated costs with the creation of this bronze. And for many, many years, it stood on the far west side of town, kind of a lone standing sentinel. Hart Mountain is to the north in the background, you can see in the contemporary photo. And what Whitney couldn't have imagined is that a whole campus dedicated to Buffalo Bill and well beyond would be built oriented toward her sculpture. Now, as you might imagine, the citizens of Cody and the Buffalo Bill Memorial Association specifically had a lot to say about what they wanted Bill to look like, how they wanted him to be celebrated. And here he is recognized for his role as an Army Scout. So early in his professional career, he's youthful, his horse, strong and regal. He raises his firearm above his head. This is a very celebratory depiction of this frontier hero. And again, a proud depiction as well of its sculpture next to the finished bronze. There was a critique at one point that Whitney didn't quite have Bill's horse just right. So the citizens of Cody shipped horses by rail, so the story goes, to Whitney's New York studio so she could model after them in real life. And so despite these kind of negligible critiques, that one maybe not so negligible, Whitney finished the sculpture, was proud of it, so was the town of Cody, and it was installed with pride on the west side of town. So when we talk about the Memorial Association, founded on the occasion of Buffalo Bill's death, we really need to talk about this woman, another Whitney woman. This is Mary Jester Allen, so Buffalo Bill's niece, who was really the dynamo behind the creation of the Buffalo Bill Memorial Association. She also spearheaded, with citizens of Cody and other members of the Cody family, the creation of the very first Buffalo Bill Museum, which was constructed in 1927, 10 years after Buffalo Bill's death. You see a photo of it here right after its completion. It's a log cabin structure. Today, this is our Chamber of Commerce. But at the time, it was the Buffalo Bill Museum. It was built to recreate Bill's TE Ranch just west of Cody. And it was filled with artifacts from the family to do with the Wild West, Buffalo Bill's traveling exhibition. Also, mementos from his life and times, his own art collection and possessions. It really celebrated Bill, the man, in all of his various identities. I love this picture, which was taken in the mid-1950s before the construction of the first structure of the modern museum campus. But let me show you the two landmarks we've just discussed. The first, this circus, the circular park containing the Scout, so way on the west side of town, overlooking the Shoshone River. Yellowstone is this way. And then here in the second circle is the location of that original Buffalo Bill Museum. And a lot of empty ground between them. Here, demarcated in the rectangle, is the location of what would become the Whitney Gallery of Western Art, the very first structure on the new museum's campus, named after, who else, but Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. It wasn't Whitney, though, herself who gave money to create this new structure. It was her son, Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, who in the 1950s put up two major gifts to construct this museum, which stood independently on its own on the west side of town, and then add to the collection. The first exhibition was populated by recent acquisitions, but a lot of the works on the wall were loans. And here you see, this is a great picture, a moving van pulling up to the entrance then of the Whitney Gallery of Western Art, now called the Whitney Western Art Museum. And things are being unloaded rather casually by today's standards. Works of art packaged with paper and twine. There are some crates of sculptures as well, some bins. And there's the original curator and director, Harold McCracken, greeting the art handlers. Here is the Whitney as you would experience it today. Here we're looking from the hub, the area I just pointed out, to the north, and you'll see just barely the outline of the Scout. So this museum was oriented in its construction to face out to Whitney's Scout, which is perfect. So we're looking north. And what you get to see in this image and begin to have a sense of is the wide variety of art on view in the Whitney. And mostly here, we're looking at contemporary paintings, but also in the foreground, some historical bronzes by Alexander Fenster Proctor. Our collection is some 10,000 objects strong within the Whitney alone. There are more than that, really. It contains 4 studio collections of 4 major figures in Western American art, those being Frederick Remington, W.H.D. Kerner, Joseph Henry Sharp, and Alexander Fenster Proctor. When I say studio collections, I mean a massive amount of art created by these artists, also personal effects, items from their homes and studios. We're able to uniquely tell the stories of these artists in a way that no other museum can. So if we had walked all the way down the Whitney and we're standing looking out toward the Scout and we turned around, looking back toward the hub, this is what we would see. You begin to get a sense of our strength in Frederick Remington works. This doesn't begin to do that collection justice. An initial gift to the museum comprised over 100 paintings by Frederick Remington and all of his studio artifacts. To the left, you see a monumental painting by recently deceased artist Alan Marden. This painting depicts the Battle of the Greasy Grass. Across the way from this work is a historical painting by Edgar Paxson celebrating Custer and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. These two paintings ostensibly depict the same historical moment, but from very different perspectives. Marden taking a cue from ledger art, traditional means by which Native people depicted historical events, beginning with their time in forts in the West. So this is an example, that juxtaposition of what we can do really well in Whitney, and that is pair and have folks critically consider historical art and contemporary art, the ideas around authorship and storytelling, and it's really quite an interesting feat that we're able to pull off because our collection is so broad and deep. Its strengths lie in the earliest eras of Euro-American art making in the West, dating to the 1830s, to very recently created works of art. So at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, beginning with the Whitney Western Art Museum, we constructed a new wing or museum on about a 10-year basis. So the first museum to be constructed was the Whitney Western Art Museum here. Then a decade later, in 1969, the Buffalo Bill Museum, the rehoused original museum, was created. And this hub area created between the two. So this still exists today. Here is that entrance that we looked at on the first slide. The Buffalo Bill Museum added a lower level for exhibition. That doesn't exist over in the Whitney Western Art Museum. Underneath the Whitney is area for art storage and offices. You begin to see here how our campus is expanding, and just to the right of my photo is the scout again to orient us. So the Buffalo Bill Museum, as I discussed earlier, contained artifacts, art related to Buffalo Bill's history, his life and times, but it's much broader a collection than that. It really relates to all of Western American history with focus geographically on the Northern Plains and Rockies. So here you see the Deadwoods coach and the interior of a camp scene. We have fabulous historical photos drawn from a McCracken research library to help really bring Buffalo Bill's story to life. Saddles he used, clothing, artifacts. He was truly the most celebrated man, the most famous man in the world at the time of his death. He circulated his image more than any living man at that time, in a way that was comparable to being known like, you know, a religious or military leader. We try to offer as many opportunities within our gallery spaces for visitors to engage and for it to be a real experience, to dive deeper. And here is one of those opportunities, a virtual Wild West. So using your smartphone in a particular app, you hold it over this blank canvas of a show scene, a Wild West scene, and have it come to life before your eyes. You can zoom in and see what the characters are doing, see how complex a setup this kind of monumental theatrical extravaganza really was. So following the Buffalo Bill Museum in 1979, the Plains Indian Museum opened. Now this photo that I show you is from a dedication in the early 2000s. But I want to point out that our Plains Indian Museum at the time of its founding and still today is lucky enough to have a large membership among its advisory board among tribal peoples. So folks representing regional tribes, the Shoshone, the Crow, and others. What you'll see in this incredible space with soaring ceilings are artifacts from the past and present, and some that transcend time. We have large scale, full scale teepees, we have contemporary art, fabulous examples of clothing, accoutrement, items of function and beauty, great history to be told here, and many Native voices heard in this space. Another angle. So really, if folks are coming to Cody and they mean to come to the Center of the West, oftentimes they're aiming quite literally for the Cody Firearms Museum. This is a collection that's encyclopedic in scope, not solely dedicated to Western arms history, and it's very well known among connoisseurs and enthusiasts of firearms. So the one of the original gifts was the Winchester collection, and you see an early installation here. This collection was displayed in 1980 underneath the Buffalo Bill Museum, and then reinstalled in the newly constructed Firearms Museum in 1991. As it happens, the Firearms Museum is the most recently renovated of our museums at the center of the West. And here you see a picture of what it looks like today, an incredible variety and number of arms to be viewed and studied, drawer upon drawer, full of various examples. Herein, we look at social and cultural side of firearms. We also really do an expansive job, a laudable job of showing changes in technology over the years. There's something for everyone here, even those of us who aren't very familiar with firearms history. Another opportunity to interact comes in the form of using simulators throughout the gallery. Across the hub from the Whitney is the Draper Natural History Museum. This is the most recently constructed of our museums, and this was opened in the early 2000s. This is a really resonant space for a lot of our visitors and especially our families. You know, I mentioned if folks are aiming for Cody to come to the center of the West, they usually are coming for the Firearms Museum. But those who come generally have come just from a visit to Yellowstone National Park, or they're on their way, because as I mentioned, we're right on the east gate of the park. So this museum offers the opportunity to get to know the greater Yellowstone ecosystem intimately before or after your visit. And its construction is really interesting, really creative. If you make your way from the hub to the ground floor of the Natural History Museum, you cycle down through various biomes or ecosystems and encounter the flora and fauna of each of those. So just beautifully and wildly diverse set of specimens and facts to enjoy. Here you can see that kind of winding path down from the alpine environment all the way to the sagebrush steppe. And there's a great map just beyond the railing there that shows the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, whose borders are nebulous, of course, and extend far beyond the roughly square boundary of Yellowstone National Park. This summer, the Draper Natural History Museum really did a great job of redefining what artist in residency looks like. We invited Lee the Bone Man Post to come articulate or assemble a grizzly bear skeleton, working with volunteers and staff, even security guards, school children. He reassembled a donated set of grizzly bones so that it would look like it's scratching its back on a tree. He also, working with a great number of people, assembled a mountain lion skeleton as well. At the Draper Natural History Museum, we are recipients of specimen, megafauna, birds. These are removed from the landscape for one reason or another, or were salvaged. They were found deceased. We keep these specimens for research purposes. And generally what happens is that the specimen are cleaned of flesh and kept, their bones are kept in our vaults. For instance, one of our areas of strength is in wolf skulls, and there's a lot to learn through comparative analysis of those. One really well-loved aspect of the Draper Natural History Museum's educational programming is its Raptor program. And here you see two of our avian ambassadors. We have quite a group of these and a wonderful staff who takes care of them and who provides educational programming with them. These, of course, these animals are not able to return to the wild, so they will live out their days happy and well-fed and doing good work with the Natural History Museum. One of the gems in our crown is the McCracken Research Library, as I mentioned up front. Here you see our reading room, and this collection is not circulating, which means we're not a lending library, but we do welcome fellows and public inquirers on an everyday basis. And we have a very robust fellowship program wherein professional researchers, those working on their master's or PhDs or postdoc research, come and dive into our holdings, which are not only books, but also archives, extensive photographic holdings, maps. We also have an active, a robust conservation studio. And here you see a pair of stirrups being worked on by one of our interns. We've got a great internship program, which brings in students, in this case of conservation, and with careful oversight from staff, work on objects in need of a bit of love and care. So when you come to the museum, I would implore you not to miss the opportunity to have a bite of Ron's biscuits and beans out front at the Chuck Wagon. Ron or one of our educators will give you a little insight into what it was like to be at the Chuck Wagon a century ago. If you'd like to learn more about a particular facet of the Center of the West's collections, I might recommend that you engage an exclusive tour. So this is a private tour for you and or a small group wherein you're paired with a content expert who takes you on somewhat of a create your own adventure tour of the center. If it's firearms you're interested in, you'll have the chance to hold them, to check them out close up. You'll get a lot more information than you see on the labels with this new and really fun and interactive kind of tour. I mentioned our Strength in Children's programs. This summer, we partnered with Park 6 School District to conduct some really intensive and wonderfully fun programs meant to make up for deficits created by the COVID-19 pandemic. This was an opportunity for kiddos to get back together, re-engage socially, and also in a curricular way as well to fill some of those gaps. Collecting butterflies, learning how to package artwork for shipment, beautiful color wheel, flowers there. And to wrap up, I wanted to talk about two temporary exhibitions, which are on now, and two that will be on next summer. So if you come now and before August the 6th of next year, you'll have the chance to visit this really fun exhibition that I had a lot of fun curating called Italy's Legendary Cowboys of the Maremma, photographs by Gabrielle Severi. Severi is located in Napa, California, but she's of Italian descent, and early on in her photojournalistic career became interested in the 100+ year history of Italian cowboys. Now, it's not something many of us are familiar with, this side of Italian culture, but in the area on the west side of the country, marshy area north of Rome, southern Tuscany, this Maremma region, is home to a living tradition of cowboying that stretches back to the days of Buffalo Bill and before. And actually, it's the case that they interacted with Buffalo Bill when he traveled his show to Italy. And there is tale of this legendary sfida or bet that was made between Buffalo Bill and a local Italian duke, pitting Italian cowboys against American cowboys. It's said that the Italians came out on top, but I doubt Buffalo Bill would have ever admitted that. This exhibition includes large-scale photographic reproductions, beautiful fine art photographs, and a film as well to help really give you an atmospheric sense of what life is like for these hardworking cowboys and cowgirls. Another exhibition on right now celebrates the 150th anniversary of Yellowstone National Park. This exhibition is titled For the Benefit and the Enjoyment of the People, and it's on view through the end of January into early next year. Now, given that it was the anniversary of the park, we certainly wanted to do something to celebrate. We are neighbors, after all, with the park, and many of our collections illuminate facets of Yellowstone's history. When we were thinking about how we could uniquely really tackle the subject, we thought about looking at Yellowstone through the lens of people who have enjoyed it, used it, lived in it, created management strategies around it, really the human story of the park. And so what you see here is a vast and varied collection of objects from every one of the museum's collections and the research library, and really an interesting take on Yellowstone's history. And to wrap up, I wanted to point out two exhibitions you can visit when you're here next summer during our high season. These open on May the 20th, close on October the 22nd. One looks at the work of Alfred Jacob Miller dating to the 1830s and just thereafter. The other, the work of Tony Foster, who's a contemporary artist hailing from Great Britain. The Miller exhibition will contain more than 50 paintings, 15 or more complementary historical objects, There will also be 2 period vignettes, kind of like period rooms, in which you can vicariously kind of transport yourself, imagine what it would be like in Highland Scotland in the 1840s and in the Rocky Mountain West in the 1830s. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how those 2 places are connected. For the Foster exhibition, we'll have 16 large-scale contemporary watercolors, some as wide as 4 feet. And for both of these exhibitions, there will be great graphic treatments, audiovisual elements, and a really wonderful interpretation. Now, why pair these 2? Well, they both have everything to do with the Green River. Miller was there in 1837 at the rendezvous, which was held on its banks. Foster has been working there over the past 2 years to help provide artistic perspective on its cultural, historical, and ecological importance today. The Green River is often overshadowed here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem by Yellowstone, but the Green River is one of the most important and critical watersheds in the West. So the first exhibition I mentioned celebrates the work of Alfred Jacob Miller, who had a Scottish patron in Sir William Drummond Stewart. On the left, you see a photograph I took of the Wind Rivers, and I'm in the Green River Plain there, very near to where Horse Creek and the Green River have their confluence, and that's the location that's ostensibly pictured at right, where the rendezvous took place. Now, the fur trade was a pretty brief period in American history, beginning in the 1820s, lasting just a couple decades, and Miller was the only Euro-American artist during that time to be an eyewitness. And his paintings certainly are romanticized. They depict an exotic West and have much to do with his training in Europe, but they are really the only visual evidence of what transpired at this time in the West, and they have a lot to offer us. There's also a lot to learn about the artist himself and his Scottish patron when we look at these works. And what we're doing with this exhibition for the first time ever is bringing together a critical mass of these paintings created about the West for a castle in Scotland. And amazingly, these paintings, the lion's share of them, ended up back in Wyoming. We're bringing them together. Here you see a map of the artist's travels with his patron. Started out from St. Louis and headed west just for one summer and into fall. Their destination was the Wind River Mountains in what's now Wyoming, then called Oregon country. There is a self-portrait of a young Miller, about as he would have looked or depicted himself when he headed west. He was picked up in New Orleans by his Scottish patron, but Miller was originally from Baltimore, was well known as a portrait painter, making his way, but had the opportunity of a lifetime when he met Stewart. So after their trip west, Miller immediately began depicting works of art for his Scottish patron, and his patron brought him over to Scotland a couple of years thereafter in the 1840s to his Scottish estate in the Lower Highlands in Perthshire, Scotland. This is Merthyr Castle as it looks today on the right, and then not very dissimilar from its historical profile, which Miller depicted on the left. Our exhibition is going to contain watercolors of intimate scale, like the one on the left, and then huge oil paintings that were made for castle walls. This one's like 10 feet wide. It's called the Cavalcade, and it's one of the showstoppers on our checklist. It's very dramatic. You'll see Stewart, the patron, is pictured here on a white horse. He's also here in the watercolor. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo, finding Stewart in these paintings. Now, Miller was creating the watercolors for essentially what would seem like a travelogue, what we might have today as a photo album, a sketchbook, relaying more mundane parts of the trip, quiet moments in camp. The excitement, the drama was saved really, in the most part, for the large-scale oil paintings. Stewart wanted these to decorate his Scottish castle so he could show off his experience in the West, what he loved about it, his bravery, his deeds, his ability as a sportsman. This was very much in line with a desire, to self-identify as an adventurer. one who traveled east and west. The complementary exhibition, like I mentioned, is the work of Tony Foster, who is an artist living in Cornwall these days. Picture on the left shows Tony on the trail in the winds. I had the opportunity to accompany him. It's field research. This September, we hiked into the winds to find the perfect vantage point onto Square Top, one of the more iconic peaks in the Wind River Range, to represent the source of the green, which is actually further up on the Continental Divide. The green is born of glacial and ice pack melt. But you can see small watercolors like the ones on the left will be included, and large-scale watercolors as well. These are begun or finished in situ, so en plein air or outside. Tony's also known for including bits of map and artifacts in his work, and you'll see some fossils dating 50 million years, I believe, from the Green River Formation. These are very carefully crafted watercolors. They're beautiful. They are somewhat reminiscent of the work of Thomas Moran and his exploration of the Green River long, long ago. Here's a picture I took of Tony working in the field on a painting that will be 4 feet wide. And there is Square Top in the upper left-hand corner. That's his subject. Here's a better angle on his work in progress. And then the gorgeous alpenglow from Green River Lakes. This is Upper Green River Lake. So I hope that these stories, insight into artifacts, and the present and upcoming exhibitions really inspires you to come to Cody sometime soon. And we welcome your visit. And I personally welcome your questions. So please feel free to reach out. My email address is first name, last initial, Karen, M-K-A-R-E-N-M, as in mother, at centerofthewest.org. And yeah, come see us and enjoy the Center of the West.